I see it as there's a lake, and there's a lake, we'll start there, and there's a shed. And I think the shed more properly should be called a workshop, but I always call it a shed in my head. So the lake is where stuff just comes up out of. And I've always imagined that there's something living in that lake that chucks me things. It just throws things up at me that I catch. And then I take them in the shed and I work on them. So, but this is where things start getting a bit elaborate. So when I read my own writing, and often when I read other people's writing as well, I often think of it in terms of there's too much lake and not enough shed there. That wasn't worked on long enough. You didn't work on. At other times, I think that's pure shed. You just, you bang that up. There's nothing of the lake in there. So I have the best writers, the absolute pinnacle. They have an amazing lake and they have a phenomenal shed. Something that borders on a palace, right? In other words, they have extraordinary stylistic tools. They are amazing prose technicians, but they also have that bizarre ability to pull out the idea that no one else has ever quite done before, or to extract the character who lives with virtually nothing done to it. I swear to you, I've wanted to be a writer as long as I knew there was such a thing as a writer. But I have this very weird early memory, and I know I must have been 4 or under, because we left the first house that we ever lived in as a family when I was 4. And I know it was in that house because I can just about remember it. And I couldn't write, but I was copying figure by figure, letter by letter, a story. And I just copied it out on a page. And I didn't know what I'd written, I just copied the words. And there I was very pleased that I had made these marks on the paper. And I physically enjoy writing, I always have. And then I realised that books were made by people. I can't remember realising that, but I assume I did. And I never, ever wanted to do anything else. Potter, really. I wrote other things. I was constantly writing. I was always writing. And there was a novel called The Private Joke that I was writing for a couple of years. The premise of it I actually still really like, but I was too young to write the book that I wanted to write. Too young because I just didn't have enough life experience to credibly write these characters who were all in their sort of early 40s. It was just not going to work, even though I still think the premise was decent. Before that, I was writing a different thing that was appalling. But you've got to write some appalling stuff. You go through phases, and when you're very young, you're back and you imitate different people, but that's good, that's healthy. And it was really only with Potter that I hit my stride, and I thought, oh, I can do this. This I can do. I could feel that I could do it. So, yeah, and I learned as I went. I don't know. I don't know where ideas come from. I think the more interesting question might be, why do some people why do some people want to live in a fictional world so much? And why do some of us voluntarily spend hours and hours alone in a fictional world? But the trouble is I can't answer that question either. But that's maybe the more pertinent question. Some of us just are happy living that way, happiest living that way. Ideas come in different ways, and different kinds of book form differently. That's been my experience. So with Harry, the idea really did come, it was the idea for the story, the premise of the story came first, which was literally a child doesn't realise he's a wizard until he gets the letter. With other books, with the Ickabog, the word Ickabog came. I thought, what is that? What is an Ickabog? And that's how the story started, with me trying to find an entity to attach that word to. And with the Strike books, the character came first. He came first. I did want to write what I saw as quite a golden age whodunit, but in a modern setting. And it was interesting to think, well, how would that work? How do you, in this age of DNA analysis and high-tech detective techniques and CCTV cameras, how do you have a real old school detective in modern London? And so he was really the starting point there. But Robin came very quickly afterwards, and then I became very interested in Robin in the planning of the book, and I realised that this will be a two-hander. She's not going to be Watson forever. We'll have two Holmeses. What would normally happen is I'm working on a novel and I'm immersed in that novel completely, but I might it will normally happen at a completely random moment when you're making gravy or something and you'll have an idea for a different thing, so you run and find a notebook and then you lose the notebook, and if it was a good idea it'll hang around, and if it wasn't a good idea you'll find it in 5 years' time. And sometimes I look through these notebooks and think, what on earth was that? What did you think you were going to do with that? And then other times you have the idea and it sticks, and then it grows like something in a Petri dish, and they're the ones that are worth something, the ones that really hang around. You almost didn't need to write them down. They're the ones that live in here. So that's kind of a good rule of thumb, actually. If it's meant to be, it'll lodge up here. I learned a huge amount writing Potter. So even though this is a different kind of world building, I took all of the lessons I learned from Potter and applied them to the Galbraith books. I have a master files on all these different characters. I have huge amounts of background just to keep myself orientated. I know where Strike lived. I know a huge amount about his mother's history that I will never need to use. But sometimes you do need to use it. Sometimes you realise, hang on, we can put this would thematically work really well here. So it sounds prosaic. It sounds like being a sort of filing clerk or something for your own work. But in a sense, that's what you do. You organise it all and you've got it there to refer to. That's just the way I feel happiest working. I've certainly met writers, good writers I enjoy, who have said to me, I just see where the thread takes me. I do a lot of the thread following in the planning stage. By the time I come to write, I really know what I'm doing. That doesn't mean to say there isn't room to have fun or there isn't room to go off on a little tangent here and there, but I really like the sense of knowing where I'm going. I think it will be a 10-book series. And so I have a very clear idea of how their relationship will go over those 10 books. So it sounds quite prosaic. It's more exciting than that, but it sounds dull to think, well, in that book, that emotional milestone will be reached and so on. But you do sort of have to have those points of light along the way, because it gives it I think it gives it a satisfying rhythm. So on the one hand, I'm looking at their relationship, but then you have these discrete, these self-contained plots along the way, which are all formed in different ways. Because I had the idea for the second plot in the Strike series, the Silkworm, before I had the idea for the Cuckoo's Calling. I reversed them because I thought that Silkworm would work better as a second book, as a second case. The first one had to be something that he had to make his name from to an extent, just to move the character along. So a good example would be Lady Strike's mother. I know down to individual concerts that she ran away to go and see. It was ridiculous. I spent hours on this stuff. So I've got this huge, long biography for her, where she ran away to, who she slept with, who she wanted to sleep with. The reason all of that's valuable is it's not because you're going to use all of that. You're not going to take 4 chapters to describe what Lady did when she ran away at 18. It's because you get such a sense of the person in creating that. I got to know her really well. And obviously she never appears in the books because she's dead. But she still casts a very long shadow over her children's lives. So yeah, I got to really understand her. One of the things I really love particularly when you're creating backstory for a character, is I often feel like, oh yeah, that's how it happened. It feels like discovery rather than creation. That often happens to me. And sometimes that happens to me with plot. I'll hit a snag and I'll sit back, I'll mentally sit back. And then it comes and you think, oh yeah, of course that's how it happened. But it feels like discovery. It doesn't feel as though I made it up. It feels as though I waited and then I saw it and it was there to be discovered. I know this sounds very weird. But yeah, I often feel as though the right ideas feel as though you've discovered them. They were there waiting to be discovered as opposed to you actually creating them. Yeah. I don't think a character has ever done that to me. Plots have I've sometimes plotted it and then thought either that won't work or there is a better way to do this. And that often involves a lot of tinkering, backwards and forwards, because, you know, these things should fit together in a satisfying way. You want it to fit together in a satisfying way. I really know my characters. Yeah. We have an understanding. They don't misbehave, and I don't put them through too much hell. I absolutely love the planning process because you're still in that amazing optimistic state where you think this will be the book that you're entirely happy with. This will be the one that you have no regrets about, and you know everything is possible. All the pages are blank, so I really like that stage. And I have various quotations about writing, actually in my little loo in there, all around those walls, and I have two up here that I really like. And this one is by Faulkner, and it expresses it just perfectly. The work never matches the dream of perfection the artist has to start with. Never, never, never. So, but when you're in the planning stage, you can kid yourself, oh, this is going to be the one. This is going to be great, this one. So yeah, I enjoy that very optimistic stage. And you know, I enjoy the craft aspect of it. I really enjoy the construction part of it. And weirdly, as I've got older, I've enjoyed that more and more and more. And I think I've sort of one writer, very successful writer, who was the other way around, used to plan tons and now just doesn't feel they need to plot as meticulously. I've definitely gone the other way. So I used to do everything in notebooks, and I still do use notebooks a lot. That was from Lethal White. So I end up drawing all of these. I like this, to be slotted in. Elegant. But all these various, some of them are red herrings. Yeah, I look back and sometimes I can't remember what the hell I was writing at the time. But increasingly, I do a lot of planning on the laptop. I'll show you what I do now. I used to just handwrite all these tables. So I've got red herrings. I always do clues in blue. It's just a reminder of where information is supposed to be given, and different columns for strands of the story. Each row is a chapter, obviously. So yeah, and I always colour code. So down the side, that means Strike and Robin are together. A sort of middle grey means it's just Strike on his own, and a light grey means it's just Robin on her own. And it's a good way of seeing at a glance how much page time each is getting, because I like the balance. I like to shift between them a lot. And then when they're together, it's always, you know, stuff's always going on when they're together. So yeah, I do still use the notebooks, particularly when I'm travelling. Obviously, it's nice to have a book to just jot ideas down in. But a laptop is useful, must be said. I do. I love writing longhand. I physically enjoy writing longhand. Often at night, particularly at night, I can be absolutely exhausted. So it's 3 a.m. and I have been working since, let's say, 10 the previous morning, because my waking started to slip because I'm getting nocturnal again. And you think, right, you're done. You can barely focus on the thing. So you close the laptop and it's absolutely guaranteed that you'll be halfway up the stairs and another idea will come. Absolutely guaranteed. So I try always have a notebook in the bedroom, because then before I get to bed, I can write it down. Or I type it into my phone, or I will go back to the laptop and open it up. And depends what sort of an idea it is. If it's something, a one-liner, I will put it on my phone. But if it's an idea for a whole bit of dialogue, I've got to go back to the laptop. So you do get to a point where your brain is just so utterly consumed by it, it's exceptionally hard to shut it down. It's a peculiar thing. You just can't close it off. It does feel different to do a standalone book. So I've done 3, and I intend to do more. Obviously, just from a prosaic level, when you're in a series, you're engaged in such a big piece of work. It's incredibly immersive. That said, with all the 3 standalones I've done, novels, because I've done other little books, The Casual Vacancy and The Christmas Pig and The Ickabog, but The Ickabog was a very special project. I was totally immersed in all of those while I was writing them and really enjoyed it. There's more of a sense of completion, I think. Obviously, with a series, you've always got something to go, so you never quite have that sense of catharsis. And then when you reach the end of the series, the sense of catharsis is tinged with sadness because it's been with you for so long. The editing that I do, a constant back and forth, I do enjoy. I see it as an important part of writing. I have worked with amazing editors, and my current editor, David, is just a joy to work with. And yeah, I enjoy that. It's important to have that objective person. You've lived with this thing for 12 months longer often. It's very important to get that objective view. I would say at least 9 times out of 10, if he says to me, I feel it's dragging a bit here, it will be a part that I have my doubts about. I really enjoy that. Then you get to copy editing, which is where you're reminded that you misspell, you've got a blind spot on spelling one word, or, you didn't spot the hanging participle and all of that. So that gets to be a bit more nitpicky, but obviously very, very important. And also for things like times and dates, I'm a bit numerically blind. So as hard as I work on making sure the dates all work together, I'm by no means infallible on that. So a good copy editor is great. I'm more involved now, probably, than I've ever been. I think the landscape has changed for writers, in writers' favour, with regard to things like covers. And I think the rise of self-publishing has a lot to do with that. Writers have options now. And certainly when I was first published in 1997, you really didn't have a say. That was something that the art department were going to work. That's not to say I disliked covers necessarily. I'm just saying I can't remember ever really being asked an opinion. Maybe with the later Potter books, but it was pretty much a fait accompli by the time it got to me. I used to find titles quite difficult. I think titles are difficult, but I've become more relaxed about it. I think the only 2 titles the publisher ever had a query about, initially, The Silkworm, the second book in the Galbraith series, was called Bombyx Mori, which is Latin for silkworm. My editor said, no, it's not going to work. And I think he was probably right. So we changed it to The Silkworm. And the other title that there was an issue with was The Casual Vacancy. But I stood firm on that one, because I love it as a phrase. The casual vacancy is a term used in local government for when someone dies, and it seems such a peculiar phrase to use for a death. Thematically, it worked with the book. It's a book about absences, the absences we leave when we die, and various lacks and absences that lead to commonplace tragedies. So, yeah, I was very wedded to that title. I wanted to keep it. And the other one, famously, was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, was changed to Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in the States. Beginnings are harder for me than endings. I normally know where I'm going. I'm very future-orientated. I think that by the time you hit the end, if everything has been woven together correctly, that should be a pretty easy part to write. So I've a few times written the final chapter of a book before I've written the first chapter. And I've done that on the current book that I'm writing, which is Strike number 8. It's a question of tone. Tone is important to me. And it sort of seeps backwards through the book. I know where I'm heading. It's a bit of a sort of lodestar. I need to know where I'm going. This will all make sense if people read the book. But yeah, I had to know exactly, and it's a very important final chapter. So for the whole series. So yeah, I really needed to know where I was working towards, and I don't think I doubt any word of that will change. It's very well, it's completely formed, that chapter. So I think it will remain pretty much exactly as it is.